All right, thank you, Mr. Pat. For the next session, we will have Mr. Amitabh to talk to us about the risk assessment in the COVID world. But before we moving on to the next session, guys, if you like to, would you please scan the QR code on the screen now? That will bring you in. That will bring you to the feedback form that will be prepared for you, and you can fill up the feedback form based on the session that you are joining in, and we will be very appreciative to that. And also the feedback link will be shared on the Q&A panel. Mr. Amitabh, whenever you're ready, over to you.
Thanks. I am just bringing my slide up. Just give me a second.
Amitabh is in India and he's enjoying his stay in India as he's stuck in and he can't travel out. So all the Indians, you want to know any questions, you can go and actually block him from getting out of his house.
Okay, can you guys see my screen, please?
Not yet, buddy. We can't see your screen.
I think you have to disable Joey. I can't share because I think something is already getting shared.
Yeah, share it now.
Yep. Can you guys see?
Not yet. Not yet. We are seeing your video. Yes, we can see your slide. You're on the floor. Rock and roll.
Okay, thank you guys. Thank you to the organizers and my great friend Clement and all the great sessions that we've had today. Just a quick overview in terms of what you have seen today and what is happening around you. So what I will do is I will just give you a brief about wherever you heard risk and what is the correlation of that risk to the various great demos that you saw today. To just give you a perspective on risk, the way it is configured in our current scenarios of, in fact, multiple scenarios of the world as it is today, how that world is actually shaping up, and also that world which is actually completely struggling today on the medical scenario in terms of the virus, and how are we going to get out of it. To understand all of that, let me start from what Colonel Mustafa said in the morning in terms of remedial actions taken by governments. And there are many governments around the world who have taken many actions around what to do on the COVID and the related risk, which is primarily cyber in nature. Now, having said that, as Clement was showing you these great demos, one of the core line principle of all that you saw is that there is a huge escalation of risk. And to understand risk, just try and understand, your asset, whatever is your valuable asset that you have, in the center of multiple concentric circles. 30 seconds. And these concentric circles basically form what is called as defense in depth, and that's what Clement spent a lot of time explaining to all of you. Now, while you're looking at defense in depth, it is very imperative to really define what a cyber risk scenario is. So basically, when we look at defense in depth, we actually have to really define what is that we are protecting. So hence, cyber risk definition by design is basically looked at as threat into vulnerabilities and actual value of the information or the asset that you're actually protecting. To actually make it simple for 50% of our participants who are actually non-technical, let me actually give you a very brief story, and I actually called it the grandma's gold box. So I do pardon, please do pardon me if you have heard this story from me in some other session, but this is a very interesting story to simplify what is happening around us and how what is happening around us has actually escalated the risk around us. So I'm Amitabh Srivastav, and I actually basically focus on looking at organizations, risk portfolio, risk postures, and obviously you saw a lot of these attacks coming in, and how does the organization protect against that? So let me first give you a very interesting story. This will be a brief relaxation also for you, coming after so many great presentations from Clement and his team, and obviously Pat. So let me give you this story. So this is a beautiful story of a grandma with 7 kids staying in a single house. House is very small, but the kids really do really well, and they move on to a very large house. Now, this particular large house has a garden and has a pond, and the pond has a lot of fishes. So the son, who's the eldest son in the family, says, okay, we need to put a lot of protection around our house, and starts constructing a boundary wall. So I will relate it back to the technical people also in the call on the session today, and also tell you where the technicalities of our defense in depth really comes in. And to the non-technical people, it will make you much easier to understand risk. So the boundary wall comes in. This is our first level of defense. And so the son really builds it up. He actually puts a gate out there. And that is basically what we call as access control. To ensure that the access is properly controlled, he actually ensures a latch on the gate, second level of defense. And then a padlock to ensure that it is locked properly whenever anybody tries to enter or wants to enter the premise. The third level of defense. And then obviously you move towards the house. The house has doors and windows. So there is a grill, which in many countries we call them iron bars, and those are established. And basically again to protect. So the fourth layer of defense. There is a lock put on the door, and to ensure that everybody is able to see, or rather, not everybody is able to come in, and only people who are authorized can come in. So a process of access control again, and the concept of authorization and authentication. But the younger son is much more technology savvy, and he says, let's put a camera on the gate and at the entrance. So another fifth layer of defense comes in, again looking at access control. But the grandma has this beautiful gold box that she has gifted to the family, and this gold box is actually kept in a cabinet. And this cabinet is protected by lock and key, and even the box itself has a lock which has multiple combinations. So we call it, from a technical term, let's just call it as a server, which has encryption. And the grandma was also very intelligent, so actually created some backups of these boxes in terms of whatever gifts she had for the kids, which were kept at a separate purpose for giving it away later. So this particular scenario existed, and everybody was very happy. There was a lot of prosperity in the house. The grandma actually said that to make sure that the prosperity lives on in all his kids, she said every day you need to take one coin out from the box, take it with you wherever you're going, and in the evening you put an additional coin in. So basically looking at data augmentation, updation, new fresh data, and trying to supplement it back to the server, basically enriching your what we call as personal identifiable information or the server resources. Now, suddenly one day, what happened was, and this is where reverse psychology works in social engineering. Let's look at the current scenario. None of the kids, including the grandma, is actually allowed to enter the house. And they are all outside the house, and there is an absolute quarantine in that area. They can't come back to the house. But everybody remembers what the grandma said. So they said, okay, what do we do? So everybody started working outside, but they have to collect that one coin every day. Now, to collect that one coin every day, the sons got together and said, okay, fine, we will get 2 guards in, and they will guide us in. The creation and the concept of VPNs. And then these 2 guards will take these family members one by one and take them to the house. They can take the coin, put the locks back, and they will be back And this was happening on a regular basis till one day, one of the sons actually left the door open, and people got in, and the whole coin box was missing and gone. And that's the cyber attack. The risk that you see in all of this is when people actually went out from a perimeter defense area where you had multiple layers of different defenses put in, what we also call as perimeter security. And also in defense and security setup, in Clement's session, you saw that you need to actually create rings and layers of security so that you ensure that there is no compromise of your asset. In that scenario, if you look at what is happening, you will see in this particular story when the access control was moved away from the core of the perimeter defense, there was risk on the physical security of people moving in. There was obviously risk of accessing information from remote locations. And that's what is happening today in our current world. So if you now come back to the real world right now, suddenly everybody is outside. They are working from home on their home Wi-Fi's, and as anybody will tell you in cybersecurity, if you go to Shodan and you look at the type and make of your routers, you will see many of them have actually clear access. And in fact, I can promise you that many people on this call, on this session today, may not know their router user ID and password. Even the technical people at times at home networks have no idea of what their user ID and password is for their home routers. Because the ISPs come, they install it, and primarily for home usage, those levels of security have never been considered. Many of the home networks, until unless you're in Clement's house, don't have multiple layers of firewalls. We don't believe that in the home networks, and that's the normal household. Having said that, suddenly on 15th of March 2020, 87 countries worldwide went into a lockdown. And thousands of employees world over actually went from hardcore perimeter defense area into an area which was actually not secure at all. The VPNs were never configured to actually take so much of distributed computing load. And it gave rise to huge amount of risk in terms of accessing actual confidential information. Now, depending on the organization that you're working in, you're looking at different kinds of risk. You're looking at risks which are primarily on your customer database. You're looking at risk which could be primarily on your IP. You're looking at risk which could be primarily on health data of your patients. And the risk could be multiple on multiple levels. Having said that, suddenly by 11th of March, as WHO declared COVID as a pandemic, and 15th March onwards, almost whole of world started working outside. We saw a huge surge in terms of COVID-themed attack. Some of it I will show you. One of the things which was very unique this time was that this rise and jump was phenomenal. And as anybody will tell you in sociology, that any kind of tragedy or any kind of war, any kind of pandemic actually leads into huge kind of criminal enterprise being born. For example, if you remember or if you have read about it in 1932, during the Great Depression, bootlegging or moving of liquor, daru as we call it in India, around various geographies and countries of the world became a big business. It also gave rise to very organized crimes around it, and some of them you have seen in movies. They're called as mafias and mafioso. In many different parts of the world, the war of the two world wars that we saw gave rise to huge industrial revolution in Europe. That was the positive, but it also gave rise to a lot of manpower exploitation, formation of trade unions, and actually coercion of a different nature. After years, and almost after 1932, the world has first time seen an attack on the social infrastructure of any country, and that has come through a virus. And because of that, in fact, as Pat and um, Clement were giving their presentation, what came to my mind was the evolution of what we call as physical malware has also started at the start of this year, and it actually is peaking right now. And I will show you one of the devices which is being used very drastically and primarily to attack banks. But phishing became a huge equipment and a carrier for different kinds of attacks. So I think employee engagement, employee training is becoming very, very essential. And basically ensuring that your organization is carefully evaluated and risk is becoming imperative. Now, having said that, let me just point out three things for you. One is obviously phishing. You heard a lot, and you saw a lot of examples of it. Different kinds of phishing attacks. And after my session, as Recorded Future comes in, they will show you a lot of threat intelligence around what is happening in the dark web. But if you look at phishing as a technique, it's not that it's just happened during COVID. It's been there and it's been used very, very easily to get inside organizations. In fact, the whole leakage of the Sleth Bomber blueprint to the dark web was a job of 17 minutes, and that's the power of a good phishing attack. And many cybersecurity experts will tell you that during COVID, we did see a rise from anywhere from 180% in some countries to 2,000% in some countries where the phishing just was used in multiple levels. The first stream of attacks were primarily focused on high asset individuals, primarily because government said that, please, help us and, join us in fighting COVID-based research. So many of these high asset individuals, high value individuals were basically getting mails. In fact, I actually talked to somebody yesterday, and a very famous Indian chef, which is a Michelin star chef, actually got phished for almost 250,000 US dollars by a single attack. So phishing is certainly being aggressively used, and there are various kinds of phishing attacks which are being used. Some I will show you. Malware injection using phishing is becoming, it's almost becoming a given, because idea of phishing is to actually inject and take something away from you, or basically to actually create a scenario of ransomware. And sorry for the spelling there. This is something I wanted to mention. In fact, one of the organizations that I worked in the past actually flagged this out to many banks worldwide, and we actually were able to capture it very early. This is actually a lamp which was actually gifted as starting of this year to many of the banks worldwide, and it came as a free gift to their IT team, their front office desk, and many other teams out there. And this was not a software-driven attack. There was actually a proper software loaded and the chip designed, and it was actually inserted inside this lamp, and it gave complete and comprehensive access to the hackers. So this is another kind of attack which is becoming more and more aggressive. Another thing which has happened during this time is actually the creation of COVID-themed marketplaces. Actually, if you're interested, there is a full menu of it, and you can actually see various kinds of services which are there, and you can actually buy a phishing email kit. It's as low priced as 200, and actually go out and actually exploit and actually become a hacker yourself by using this kit. What we have also observed from a risk perspective is that during this time, due to high unemployment, and primarily during this time, you will see employment levels going high in every country around the world. Eastern Europe, Russia, and related countries, we are seeing the unemployment levels to be extremely high, and especially in the technology sector. So you're seeing a lot of rise in these kind of kits being made. And so the risk from these kits is extremely high, and this has given rise to cyber kitties, as we call them, people who have actually very low knowledge of at actually hacking, but they can use these kits and become really very effective. So in fact, one of the things that I just spoke about yesterday in one of the conferences is the rise of cyber kitties as the new and the biggest threat and the biggest risk during COVID. Another aspect which is becoming very imperative is the usage of establishments and establishments like World Health Organization. In fact, the initial 200 and 300 mail types of phishing that we filtered out from 7th of March to 18th of March, they were all related and themed around WHO. And the theme was very simple, which was basically COVID attack and the latest figures. And that, as Meera beautifully showed, and Clement also showed, how those infographics were used to actually compromise the system. Followed by the US and the US fight with WHO and the related documentation war in US. There were a lot of documentation flow in US of phishing types, which were primarily based on the CDC communication. CDC actually started in US communication to a lot of government organizations and to a lot of front-end organizations to actually do a lot of corrective action in terms of handling this crisis. And that was used to actually go and actually create ransomware attacks in a lot of these government organizations. This is another marketplace. The vaccine attack actually started at the end of March in the first week of April, and this was very high-end attack, and I think the maximum number of people during COVID who were impacted were primarily individuals. I'm talking individuals, but primarily because of the vaccine attack. And because this was a huge scam triggered worldwide, and the medium was Gmail and WhatsApp for its segregation. It spread like wildfire, especially in Europe and especially in Italy. And this became a huge scam during this time. The risk again in this, if you look at it, is that people during such times where everything is falling apart all around you, there's death and there's negative news, they're looking at something to catch on, and this is what the hackers were able to exploit. And many of them actually lost a lot of money in Europe, particularly US and parts of Asia, India included, on this great coronavirus vaccine scam, as we are calling it now. By end of April, just to give you a timeline of it, we were able to now see absolutely a new phenomenon. First, organizations didn't have a defined BCP of a pandemic scenario. It didn't exist. There were server failure issues, there were other issues, there was even fire and flood and earthquakes, but a pandemic-like scenario didn't exist. So the BCP, which is called as a business continuity plan, was heavily compromised during this time. It just was not working. And because it didn't exist, the working from home policy was extremely compromised too. Now, many of you who have worked in organizations which are large, small, they will know, or you will know, that working from home actually existed for people who were physically compromised or pregnant ladies, but it was never existing for a pandemic-like scenario that we are living in right now. So every IT department across the world, trust me, across the world, was rushing to find ways to create video conferencing tool. They were trying to get people to talk to each other. So collaboration tools and the hunt for collaboration tools became a big imperative. And as Colonel Mustafa was telling you in the morning, Zoom became a big winner during this time, but Zoom was heavily compromised and it continues to be heavily compromised. And because everybody and every IT department was desperately trying to look for solutions. Clubbed with that, what didn't exist was the complete disaster recovery mechanism in a pandemic scenario. And why it didn't exist was because it was never conceived to be the way it is. It will now exist in the future for sure, but in our generation, I think we have never seen, and in fact, in our father's generation also, we have never seen something like this ever happen. So this was not even thought of, and it was not even there. So many organizations faced complete blackouts for weeks before they were actually online to get all their assessments started. Then risk assessment audit, which became a very documentation driven ISO kind of scenario. And it is not actually, and all of us, me, Clement, Pat, and if Colonel Mustafa will tell you that it's not. It's a very crucial ingredient in terms of your existence, and it should be part of your performance matrix of an organization. It was done once a year, and in some organizations twice a year. But often the interpretation of it was not very well articulated. It actually met with two words, which was a good vulnerability assessment and then looking at pen testing, and that's where it was. Some of it led into training, yes, and some of them actually did not lead into hardcore training. But physical asset protection policy, some of the large organizations did have it, but it didn't exist in smaller organizations. The endpoint protection, and for non-technicals, endpoint protection is the device on which you're actually working. So it could be your laptop, your iPad, or even your mobile. And it was heavily compromised. So solutions like Zimperium are not good to have. They are now becoming must. Because if you do not have them and you're accessing information which are crucial to your organization, it will become a big nightmare. Micro level employee level engagement, I think now becomes the mantra for the HR departments. If you are not having it, you are exposing not just yourself but your employees to grave danger. The example that of the individual, I will not name him, that Pat took, or the great example of the Sony attack and what happened to the individual who was actually the forefront of that attack, is a classic example of what can happen and go wrong to you personally if your organization gets compromised. So please be wary of it. Please be ensuring that at all times you're looking at yourself and your organizations very, very carefully as you're trying to protect yourself from COVID. So mask is essential for you. In the same way, having the right cyber hygiene organization. What I also did, which I will do quickly, is to actually show you a pest analysis also, and just highlight 2 pointers in it. We have worldwide the largest and the first time in our history of this mankind post 1932 unemployment. This unemployment has various implications, and these implications are primarily on the risk aspect in our industry. Many of the people have lost jobs, and especially in Europe, and especially in Eastern European countries where we're already struggling. Large hubs of cybersecurity attackers like Russia and other countries related to Russia have lost a lot of jobs. So you will see a rise in terms of what is going to happen on the attack scenarios. As I think Clement was pointing out, as you take your devices now back to your offices post July, August, September, as different countries open up their lockdowns or circuit breakers or MCOs as we call it in Malaysia. Why these malwares are not active right now is they are waiting for the right attack scenarios. And that's the reason we are heavily recommending, please ensure you clean it up, ensure these laptops are not plugged into your system at all. Just to, as I wrap it up, is to look at what you need to do is to probably look at new operating models for your business, which are risk-centered and also centered on taking risk assessment as a part of your performance matrix. You need to reset your security systems, reconfigure your VPNs, make them ready for distributed computing of the nature and size that you're seeing right now. It is also very crucial is to actually build a remote access, bring your own device policy, which actually centers around securing end sites, which could be your home, which could be places where you're actually working from. In majority of the cases, it's working from home. So actually organizations need to take those serious steps in terms of ensuring that your houses are protected, your house networks are protected properly. Reassess your IT architecture. I think one of the biggest takeaways that we had from this tragedy was that probably as an industry, not just cybersecurity industry, as an IT industry as a whole, we need to look at how our IT infrastructure is laid out. While defense in depth is crucial and important, we need to figure out, is it serving the purpose? Are we spending too much on perimeter and less on endpoint? And the devices which are engaging our crucial databases. And then obviously, I will also highly recommend a robust threat intelligence platform. Why I'm saying that is I think early warning systems are now becoming a must. It's no longer fancy, it's a given. If you don't have it, you have a problem. And if you have it, if you don't use it, then you have a major problem. So please ensure that you're looking at all of this and ensuring that you have a very robust threat intelligence plan. Last but not the least, ensure that you have regular audits for risk assessment, not annually. We are strongly recommending as industry professionals to have quarterly audits, if not monthly, to ensure that you look at the risk posture of your organization, create right kind of technologies and processes, and also ensure that there is a culture of cyber resilience and cyber hygiene built inside your organization. With that, I'm coming to an end. Thank you for your time. If you have questions, please put them under Q&A, and we will love to answer them at the end of the session. Thank you.